Welcome to Nerd Stalker. I am Adolfo Ferranda, your host at Nerd Stalker on Twitter, with another great host and guest here. Host? I'm the host. Yes, I am great. Guest here, John Pugliano. So he is the author of this really cool book here, The Robots Are Coming, A Human Survival Guide to Profiting in the Age of Automation by Ulysses Press. Author John Pugliano, host of the popular Wealth Studying podcast, shows how to harness the uniquely human qualities that will give you the competitive edge over automation, creativity, ingenuity, and entrepreneurship. If you want to defeat the robots, you need to have a battle plan. Welcome to the show, John.
Adolfo, great to be on Nerd Stalker. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. So, John, for those that don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a money manager. My firm is called Investable Wealth, which is private, independent money manager. Manage about $20 million. Work out of Utah, based out of Utah, but have clients all over the country. And I'm a follower of trends, technology. That's how I make my money. And that's what prompted me to be writing about robots, even though I'm not a tech guy.
Which is amazing. When I look deeper into what you do, it amazed me because going through the book and reading 50% of the book really in depth, and then going through the rest of it here, you really nailed a lot of thoughts that I would not sort of attribute to a non-techie, right? So our audience is heavily like techie, entrepreneurial types, and you really nailed a lot of those topics.
Yeah, and I guess I'm a little bit of a passed over techie. I was in computers many years ago, but I got out to pursue other interests. But yeah, Fortran was a foreign language that I used to use in college. So it tells you how far back I go.
I'll pretend like I don't know what you're talking about then, to not show my age as well.
Yeah, I said one of my kids. I said that to him the other day. I said that he goes, Fortran? I read about that in like ancient history.
Well, this is a very timely book. You nailed the time. I've been talking about this topic for years now, and in the early day when I initially started talking about this stuff, people look at me like I'm the tinfoil hat guy, right? And now it's surfaced to the reality where I'm hearing day to day people talk about the concern about job loss and that type of thing. You touch on that as well as all kinds of other stuff. One of the things that I would like to ask you about that you touch on in the book is this notion of free labor. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, really the whole concept of the book is, over the last 20 some years, we've seen data become free. Information has become free. And I see the next wave of that being where labor becomes free or near free. Mm-hmm. When you have a robot, and when I talk about robots, again, the tech community gets it, but most people don't. I'm not talking about just necessarily physical mechanical arms. I mean apps, anything that does what could be done with manual labor. In a sense, voicemail, texting, mm-hmm. that's all robotics, artificial intelligence, and that is becoming essentially free as information did. And, it's hard for people to get their heads around that. But, I'm 55 years old. So I go way back to when there were phone books, encyclopedias, these kind of things, right? Mm-hmm. And in those days, if you would have said information would be free, people would have thought you were crazy. Mm-hmm. But we look at it today and, you basically only have a couple newspaper print media companies that are even profitable when there used to be 2 or 3 newspapers for every city. There used to be, mm-hmm. things called phone books and all these different things that were part of the print industry because information was valuable in and of itself, but it was conveyed in such a way that there was a lot of cost to it. Mm-hmm. And now it's virtually free, and labor is going to go that route as well. And so a lot of the things we're going to see more and more dark factories where there's no employees. Donald Trump talks about making America great again. Original heading at one of those chapters was making America robotics again, and the editors didn't like it. So he changed that around to make it robotic or something. It was never robotic to begin with. But that's my thing, is that jobs are definitely coming back to America. They're going to be mm-hmm. done by robots, not by humans.
Right. So another thing that I really love about the book, at the end of several of these chapters, you have these action plans, right? And so what gave you that idea to do that, to sort of help the individual who's reading the book?
Yeah, and that's part of my whole learning process. I like the I'm very much a program kind of learner where I was in the military for a number of years. So you learn a task and then you get trained on it and then you get tested on it and then you teach it to someone else. And that's kind of the process you go through. And so when I wrote this book, I mean, I wrote it as a survival guide, right? Survival being in terms of how are we going to make it through this next 20 years, both through employers, entrepreneurs, investors. And I wanted to do more than just give my ideas, because as I say in the book numerous times, I don't have a crystal ball. I have no idea if 50% of jobs are going to be eliminated, 75%, 10%. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to happen over the next 5 years or 20 years, but it is going to happen. Something is going to happen. And so I put these little exercises in there to get people to think about their own personal situations and what they can do to apply to themselves, because I'm going to give them the broad, I'm painting the broad canvas, and I want these little learning exercises in there to spur people's thoughts and creativity.
So one of the topics you touch on in the book is this notion of future tax. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Of tax?
Future tax.
Tax, yeah. So again, one of the premises of the book is if there's less people working, then there's going to be less, revenue collected from employees. At the same time, we have obviously a social safety system out there to help people. So more people are going to need food stamps, unemployment, things like that. At the same time, the tax base is declining, like you see in cities. Look at Detroit. You have everybody move out, and just the people that are left there would be the people that are unemployed, and they need the help the most, but there's no tax base to support it. So what are you going to do? Well, you're going to have to go back and tax those that do have income. Bill Gates has talked about taxing robots. It's kind of his spin on the same concept I'm talking about. Is he's saying, hey, robots are going to take people's jobs, tax robots. I'm saying yes. Essentially, taxing robots, you're taxing the people that own them, which are going to be the Bill Gates of the world, the Musks, right? Those guys, because they're going to be building the factories that aren't using much human labor, and that's where we get all this concentrated wealth, where Zuckerberg is, multi-billionaire. Just in a few years, he created this immense empire, which has wiped out all these other industries. They're going to come to guys like him, and they're going to heavily tax them, right, to help the disparity. So I think what we're going to see is a lot of, there's different names for it, but a guaranteed minimum income is what I call it. A guaranteed minimum income where people are just not going to be able to have jobs. And we see that now. I mean, we only have 95 million people are of employable age that don't work. So while we're at all-time low unemployment rates, it's has to do, I think, a lot more with the way the government calculates the number than able-bodied people that are unable to find adequate jobs.
Right. So and that's one of the topics that I was going to jump ahead and we were going to discuss. We might as well hear is what you call guaranteed minimum income. Some people, and I'm curious why you call it that, number one. What I've heard is universal basic income sometimes too. And perhaps that's some sort of politicized type of term or not. I don't know. But one of the things that really does scare me that you touched on is the income inequality and the potential numbers and percentages, high percentages of job losses, because I've seen different statistics where once you reach a certain threshold, then it can become sort of chaotic.
Yeah. In terms of the job loss.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole problem we're going to be headed into. And again, I don't know, right? I don't know if it's, a lot of these Global Economic Council, the tech billionaires are saying 30% job loss. That's kind of a number they're on. Mark Cuban saying, from Mark Cuban to Zuckerberg, all these guys are in that kind of same 30% range. And again, I don't know what that number is. You can look at parts of Europe now where they're already youth unemployment at 20-25% anyways. We're not much off of that. And I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to sway a little bit away from it. A lot of what I think we see now with politically people calling globalization, the Brexit, people mad about jobs going overseas and that. I would argue that it's jobs that have gone to automation. Yeah. Some of them happen to be in China or Malaysia or somewhere, but more so than not, it's automation has replaced those jobs. And that's what we've been seeing since, what I call the I think in the book I called it male-dominated occupations.
Mm-hmm.
What I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, steel mills,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, coal mines. I mean, it was blue collar workers, right? And
Right.
we called them hunks, right? That was the hunk job, the manly
Yeah.
jobs,
Go Steelers.
uh,
Uh-huh.
right? That kind of stuff. So those male dominated occupations
Mm-hmm.
peaked in the United States in like 1954, I think, 1954, 1957.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been in decline for 60 years anyways in those type occupations.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, we've been able to merge over into other things. I mean, you look at the medical industry has been a huge benefactor of that.
Right.
And look at the number of male nurses now, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
again, when I was a kid, there were no male nurses. I mean, literally, never saw one. Today, I don't know if half are nurses, male nurses, but there's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's become for men. So some of these men that have lost those manly, quote, manly jobs are able to move into medical fields that pay well and that have these high-tech features to them. But on the same regards, again, you look at male participation in the workforce ages 25 to 50, and we're at really low numbers. Again, you go back to the late 50s, 60s, virtually every man worked. There were a lot of women not in the workforce yet because of sexism and things like that, but almost all the men worked. I think male unemployment from able-bodied men from say 18 to 50, maybe you had 2% unemployment, 1.5%, very, very small. Now it's much higher than that, and a lot of that has to do with this automation taking the jobs. Is blamed on globalization. And so over these last 50 years, it's affected those lower wage workers. I talk in the book about how, initially in the auto industry in Detroit and places, they started losing jobs. Union workers started losing jobs to robotic welders, robotic painters, things like that. Didn't take the lowest jobs. It didn't take away the jobs that screwing on the nuts, the lug nuts. That was actually too simple, and it wasn't worth automating because you could pay anybody to figure out how to do that. And if you misthreaded a nut, so what? You screw up a paint job, you mess up a weld, that's a problem. So they automated that first. That allowed them to get rid of skilled workers, but not the top, not the bottom. It's kind of the middle level of the skilled worker. And then you not only get rid of that employee because a welder's $25 an hour, a robot's $8 an hour, but you also get rid of all the rework and the problems, right? The robotic welder never has a bad day, never comes in hungover or anything like that. It's always going to work. And so you get better quality at a lower cost. And that happened in those manly jobs. Today, though, what I think we're going to see is more of that going to high labor jobs, white collar jobs. And that's really the premise of the book. It's going to be those doctors, attorneys, computer programmers. A lot of mid-level managers, I think, are going to get wiped out in this round of things, and there's not going to be that next level of jobs for them to go to. The middle-class man that maybe 50 years ago would have worked in a coal mine or a steel mill can now go to a community college or get a four-year degree and become a male nurse or some kind of technical occupation. That's not going to happen for the surgeon that does appendectomies, that now a robot does it.
Yeah. And I've seen some of those and talked to some people here in the Valley that have demoed and explained what's capable and what they are actually doing. There's been some remote surgery, robotic type of things happening, some automated surgery type of proven things that have worked, and all these things that you talked about. One topic that I'm very fascinated on that you sort of touched upon right there, and that really stood out for me in the book, was this notion of the mid-manager position going away. Can you expand on that and why you think that?
Yeah, so think of all the mid-level managers that are highly paid, white-collar workers, both men and women occupations, highly compensated, very intelligent. They're making $100,000 to $600,000 a year, depending upon what type of company they're with. Mostly, large Fortune 500 type companies. They are employed at that mid-level to keep the gears kind of working, right? You have really great salesmen that are out there selling, and you have really innovative CEOs at the top that are coming up with the ideas. You have Elon Musk's that create all these amazing things, and then you have the sales force that goes out and sells it. And in between is all that mid-level management stuff.
Okay.
And those people who traditionally have been very well at orchestrating things and motivating the salesman and making sure that people put in their hours and doing employee evaluations and all those kind of things. Over the last 15 years, you have enterprise software that's come in that's really, these managers have basically been teaching enterprise software how to do their job. And
this is awesome. I love that point, because you got software like Salesforce and
you have Elon Musk at the top that comes up with some hyperloop, and then he has some engineers that make it, and he has some talented sales guys that go out and sell it. Enterprise software does all that stuff in between. You got Elon, and you got the producers, and you got the innovators. You don't need that. I don't think you need that level of mid-level managers like you did before, because it's all done by software. It's all seamless. It's all numbers.
I very much agree.
Big data. Why do you need all those people in the middle? I think those guys are gonna find it very difficult to justify their positions.
I think I've been, and several of us have been smelling that in the wind for some time, questioning that role for a while, and seeing it sort of diminish. And as you said, proving that.
And that's where all the growth has been, over the last 20 years. It's in that mid-level management, that administrative job where people have aspired to make large sums of money.
Wow, I never even knew that. Wow, I didn't think of that, but yeah. So your thoughts on education is one of the things I wanted to touch on. You mentioned something about practical education. Personally, myself, I'm not a big believer in college degrees. Disclaimer, I don't have a college degree. I'm self-taught engineer, programmer, working programmer. So my thoughts on the return on investment of college seems to be, I'm very bearish on it. I see it sort of waning and declining myself personally. You touched on something called practical education. Can you touch on education as a whole in your thoughts in terms of the book?
Yeah, so from a sector standpoint, I think the biggest areas that are going to get hit by automation are going to be medicine and education. Probably government too. We may or may not get into that, but and I guess
good luck with that.
I guess education and medicine and government are all kind of intertwined to begin with, anyways. But you're going to see you do see your greatest inefficiencies and your greatest inflation in the last 30, 40 years in both medicine and in education. And so I think automation is right. Automation, money, as a money manager, I always say money goes to where it's treated best, right? So it's going to go fill the void of wherever there's an abuse. That's where the money's going to go in to make things more efficient. And so education is ripe to be automated when now we have information being free, when labor becomes free. So all the information's out there now, and we still need a teacher to teach it to us. With labor being free someday, that robotic teacher, which could be you, by the way, right? with an audio podcast, I'm not ever saying we're going to take people out of the equation. You can't ever take people out of the equation, because if there's no people, there's no economy, right? So we have to have people in the equation. But in the old days, where you would have had to have a university structure of thousands of people, now maybe you can do it with 100, right? You have 100 of the brightest minds, and they're teaching and communicating via the internet or whatever the next new technology is beyond that. And so that's where I think practical education really comes in. I'll just give you a real quick example that I put in the book, and that I've thought about and seen as trends, and it's true in my life. But think of Steven Spielberg. He got several prestigious schools didn't accept him. I think I don't know, University of California, I forget which campus it was one of the well-known film schools that rejected him, and they've since gone back and given the honorary degree or whatever. But he eventually went to, I don't know, some other community college or something, and then dropped out and had his own career. You mentioned you don't have a degree. If you were Steven Spielberg today, would you even waste your time applying at Stanford or at some film school? Why? You would make great content and put it on YouTube or put it on wherever, and your audience would give you feedback, would support you on Patreon. Advertisers would advertise on your channel,
Sure.
right? And you'd be making films.
Right.
Steven Spielberg needed to go to college 50 years ago, doesn't need to go today. And so that's where I think the practical education is going to come in. I actually have a couple degrees, but I don't do anything. Nothing I learned in college makes me money today. And in fact, we're talking about the techie thing. I joined the Marine Corps when I was 17. Okay. And I hated school, didn't want to be in school, joined the Marine Corps, found after not too long that was a pretty hard life. And so I did eventually go to college, got a couple degrees, study environmental science and engineering, study computers, systems management. But where I make my money is in the stock market. I never took a college class on how to trade stocks or other than a couple introductory economics courses that they made me take for my bachelor's degree. Everything I learned in the market was all self-taught. Right. And it was because I had the desire and the interest and the talent and the motivation to go learn it. And that's where I think practical education is going. I give an example in the book too about as a kid I had music lessons and I played the saxophone, clarinet, things like that. I'm a lousy musician. I can read music, I can do all that, but I don't have rhythm. I don't have the creativity. I don't even appreciate music. If you look on my iPhone, there's no music on there. It's all podcasts. My father, on the other hand, was an immigrant, poor kid, never had a music lesson in his life. He could play by ear. He could play multiple instruments. He could write music. He could do all these things. He couldn't read music. So, I had musical knowledge. I was educated in it. But my dad had practical experience, right? My dad had musical wisdom, right? Where I just had knowledge. And I do think that's a difference in the hope, the bright spot in all this for humans is that, yes, there is artificial intelligence. You notice, though, they don't call it artificial wisdom. Right. They call it artificial intelligence. And the wisdom part is where the humans come in. And, my dad he had musical wisdom. So, yes, computer programs can write little pieces of music and they can mimic, right? But I don't think we're going to be anywhere near to seeing a computer or an algorithm or anything that creates a whole new genre of music, right? It's not, you still need Louis Armstrong, right? You still need Michael Jackson. You still need Beethoven. Now, there's a million musicians in there that mimic those people, and those jobs will be gone because the computers will do that. But it's that ingenuity, that creativity that is our competitive edge as humans.
Very nice. So one of the items that you mentioned in the book also was, and I wanted to ask you about, is how will automation minimize monopolies?
Yeah, I think, and again, this is why I'm so interested in writing the book, and I wrote it in that fashion where it has those little exercises and as a survival guide. And one of the whole sections of the book this book's in 4 parts. The second part is about entrepreneurship. And that whole monopoly thing has been a barrier to entry for people, right? You couldn't, if you want to go out and start your own electric company, good luck. There's so much capital needed. And other resources to create something like that, you can't do it. Right. Now, with technology and with people being off grid and solar panels, all these things, you don't need that electrical grid like you did before. And I'm just using this as a broad example, but sure. Whatever monopolies held before, whatever sanctions from the government or locks on technology that they had before, that was the moat around their business that protected it. You as an entrepreneur couldn't get in. Oh, you don't have a college degree. Oh, whatever. They make all these excuses why you can't get in, even though you're a genius. Steven Spielberg. All these reasons Steven Spielberg couldn't get into film school. Well, he proved to be a genius. But there were these roadblocks to him that he had to punch his ticket and get there. Those barriers to entry are coming down because of robotics. We mentioned a surgeon a minute ago about, there's all these roadblocks to getting into med school, and obviously to be a surgeon, you have to be intelligent and all those things, but you also have to have a skilled hand, right? You can't have Parkinson's disease and be a surgeon. Well, robotics are there now, where they can basically more than mimic what a surgeon can do for the most part, and they can do it on such a minute parameter, where you just think you have servo motors and things set up where that scalpel knows exactly where the artery is, and it's not going to go any further. Mm-hmm. Well, the skilled surgeon, whether he knows that by intuition or practice or his eyesight or whatever, feel, he knows the surgical plane, he knows all those things. Well, all that knowledge now can be put into these robots. And so are you going to have that, cool hand Luke to be a surgeon in the future? Maybe not. Maybe not. So that's why I think all these roadblocks are coming down, and it's going to be an amazing time to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
never been a better time.
I think you mentioned in the book something about the shoe companies, right? And how there's all these different huge shoe companies now, but you as an individual can actually print, like 3D print these shoes that conform to you.
There's a number of them out there in the book I mentioned, but I think one of the first companies that did it was Feetsies or something, Footsies out in San Diego. Mm-hmm. And they're 3D printing, and the big guys are now too. Obviously Adidas and Nike and people like that are going to get into it as well. But again, it gets back to, in the old days, you had to have a factory in Asia do that, and all the resources and all the money. Now you can program your 3D printer or whatever to come up with it and go into business. I do that, again, in my job. I trade. Look around me. I mean, I trade $20 million here, I'm about as far from Wall Street as you can get. I don't have any desire to ever be in that kind of environment. Mm-hmm. I'm able to set up my whole structure within the system, and it's not moving out of the system. A lot of people are into kind of the gray economy.
Right.
I'm not so much into that. I'm more stick to the structure and the legal framework of what's there, and use the technology to make yourself so much more competitive. Because, I have none of that overhead that a traditional money manager on Wall Street would have. None of it. So I can make a great living with 100 clients. Wow. Where, somebody would need 1,000. I can do it with 100, and I can serve my clients better. With technology, I look at, people ask me my favorite, kind of diverting here a little bit, but people ask me my favorite technology stock. Mm-hmm. It's Starbucks. And people look at me like, what? How could Starbucks be, they think I'm going to come up with some big robotic company or some big information technology. Yeah. Starbucks, in the book, when I talk about investing, one of the things that I say is that, sure, you should be investing in the Elon Musks of the world, right? That are coming up with amazing technology and rockets to Mars and all these things. But there's also, that's the bleeding edge of technology. Many people that are nerd stalkers know. I mean, you see startups come and go. Mm-hmm. We knew in the 1960s that computers were going to be big, but who was it going to be, right? Mm-hmm. International Business Machine, Tandem Computer, right? Apple wasn't even around then. You couldn't have even picked Apple or these other companies. Mm-hmm. So today, rather than looking at who's going to be the biggest robotic producer, I look at companies that can apply that technology. And when I look at big Fortune 500 companies, I don't see a company better positioned than Starbucks. And full disclosure, I own Starbucks, okay? Yeah. I own the stock. But so
do I.
So think of it. They've got an amazing business model, an amazing franchise, all that stuff that pertains to human contact. But at the same time, they're using, 5 employees. You go to a Starbucks, there's 5 employees in there. There's off-the-shelf robotic baristas right now, right? Making cappuccino is not like secret recipe. Right. It's something that's very repetitive. And those repetitive tasks, no matter how complicated they may be, become extremely easy with artificial intelligence and robotics. So whether it's making a good cup of coffee or whether it's heart surgery, if it's repetitive, there's a robot that's going to come in and I think replace that labor. Right. Starbucks could easily cut back, I think 60% on labor, and that's really their biggest cost. I mean, if you go buy a latte, you're not paying $6 for what's in that cup, right? It's the biggest cost there is the labor. So I think Starbucks of any of the big companies already has the business model. The technology's off the shelf. They're already complaining that through their mobile orders, they can't fill the orders fast enough.
Wow.
So
So
The
you
biggest
did
bang for the buck is going to be right there.
you did jump into it, but I was going to be my next questions were your thoughts on commodities and stocks in this robot environment. So can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah. So the third section of the book, I talk about being a saver, and
Yeah.
my biggest concern is that again, this is written as a survival guide, right, and to get you to think differently than what's happened in the past. And so the skill I want to teach there is that of saving. And being a saver hasn't necessarily been good over the last 50 years. Our money's devaluated. There's been a lot of inflation. But I think that robotics are going to be very deflationary. As we've already seen, the most expensive computer I ever bought was the first one I bought in 1987. Right? It was the most. It did the least, and it cost the most.
Yeah.
And because of deflation, I've gotten a better, less expensive computer every time I've bought a new one. And so those same deflationary pressures are going to affect, the cost of education is going to come down. The cost of healthcare is going to come down. Potentially even the cost of housing as we find more efficient ways to build modular housing. So as all these costs come down, your money is not going to lose the value that it has over the last 50 years. And so I'm not an inflationary person. I'm more of a deflationary. Where that comes into the whole question of that's why it becomes important to be a saver. And as a result of that, and I guess I forgot where I was going with that original question. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, no, the question was originally your thoughts on commodity and stocks in this robot environment.
Right. So with commodities in particular. So right now, there's a lot of gold bugs out there. Actually, not so many now because now they're all in Bitcoin. But there's a lot of people that believe in gold and silver and all these things, and that was basically promulgated by inflation. The underlying value of gold didn't go up because we need more gold in industrial production. It was people wanted it to protect their assets. Well, do you need that now? Right? You have Bitcoin, you have other cryptocurrencies, you have if you have deflationary pressures coming in, you also have prices either declining or staying the same. And oil is a perfect example of this. If you look at oil just in the last 3 years, 2014, the oil was $120, $110 a barrel. Right. Today, I think even after OPEC's now in their second round of extending their production cuts, oil is at $47 today. That didn't happen because some of it happened because we're not using as much oil, but we still are. I mean, if you look at how much oil is used, we're using more than we ever did, just not as much per application. And so, renewables have helped. Solar panels, things like that have all helped. But the biggest impact has been that we are able to produce more oil. The old argument, the inflationary commodity side argument was that, hey, someday we're going to use up, it's going to be peak oil, we're going to use up all the oil. And so, the tar sands up in Canada will be economically to go mine because the price of oil is going to be so high.
That's what I was a big believer of.
Right. So, peak oil. So you should buy oil stocks and invest in oil commodities because those prices are going to go up. But what happened? Actually, what happened was technology, the price didn't go up to make acquisition of those oil reserves accessible. What happened was technology caught up with it. And through horizontal drilling and fracking and big data of being able to understand where the oil reserves are and being able to compute all that, that oil is now economical to go get, not because the price of oil is so high, because the price of oil is half of what it was. It's that the technology is there. We can, in the United States, we're producing, the numbers are back up, over 9 million barrels a day. That's about twice what we produced in 2005. So we're producing twice as much, and it costs half as much. So that's what's going to affect people, and that's why it's going to be, I think, so important to save as opposed to speculate, like may have been profitable in the last 50 years.
Well, one of the items that you bring up with the little time that we have left here is Japan, right? And you use the example of Japan for all kinds of really interesting stuff. Can you touch on the two items that I was very interested in was the declining population in Japan as an example of sort of global declining population as well, and their new farming techniques too, in terms of
Yes.
automation and robotics.
Yeah, they're doing vertical farming over there. So Japan is a really interesting case study. They've been in a recession since like the last 25 years. The Nikkei hit a peak, I think, in 1990 or 1991. So you think about for people that want to buy and hold, and they say, oh, they'll always come back. Well, it took 15 years for the Nasdaq to get back to where it was after the dot-com bubble. Japan is still waiting, 27 years later, and they're still not there.
Yeah.
So they have been a country that's very high tech, very high quality, huge industrial base. Two things came in and hurt them. Number one, inexpensive labor from China and other Asian countries hurt them. So that's where they started losing. But more so than that, in the last couple decades, technology hurt them. I mean, think of your smartphone and all the things that it does. It's a camera, it's a compass, it's a GPS, it's a personal, calendar, schedules all you put, does everything, right?
Yeah.
300 different things probably just off the shelf it does. By the consumer electronics companies coming out of Japan, all the Canon and Panasonic and literally dozens of companies, those all got wiped out basically by technology. So Japan has had an economy declining. They, as a result, have very low birth rates. I think they're maybe 1.3 is their fertility rate. So replacement rates like 2.1, 2.2. The whole developed world is under birth, but Japan is among the worst. They've been hurt really bad by that, though, because your economy can't grow if you don't have people in it. At the same time, they're incredibly innovative people, very good engineers. They've been, developing robotics amazingly. Some of that's out of necessity because they just don't have the people. So they're doing vertical farming there now, which it went commercial earlier this year, and it looks like it's going to be successful. And again, this is back to barriers to entry and things. LED lighting, all that is so cheap now. You couldn't have afforded to do it 10 years ago, but you can do it now with the computer systems. They're having these vertical farms where they're growing vegetables in basically a dark factory because there's very little humans there.
Right.
And they can grow vertically. It's automated. Some of it's done aquaponically. Some of it's done in just other soil mediums. But they're able to grow and process and harvest the food with, I don't know, something like, I think they reduced the labor count by like 75%.
Incredible.
And they're starting with the highest dollar items, obviously, but that will grow and merge. And so what I think we're going to see in Japan is their low birth rates, which have really been a hindrance to them up till now, might turn out to be good for them in the next 20 years as we don't need employees. Well, Japan already doesn't have them. So I think they're going to be less hurt than other economies where, places like China with a lot of people and a lot of manufacturing, I think China's going to have a rough 20 years.
Which is amazing because China's been the juggernaut, the poster child, the darling of all the financial covers and everything. And everyone was like, we're going to have to start learning Mandarin and all this stuff in Cantonese. And it's really interesting how the pendulum is beginning to swing, or the signs, the cracks in the foundation.
It's swinging. Think about it in these terms, and I have a couple charts in the book about it. Currently, North America is very rich in natural resources. So coal and iron ore and all those things get mined in the U.S., Australia, other places, but a lot of it in between Canada and Mexico, a lot of raw materials. We mine those raw materials, we send them to Asia, primarily to China. China converts them into products, sends them back to North America, the largest market in the world. We buy them, we consume them, we turn them into junk, we send that junk back over to China to get sorted through and recycled. Now fast forward to where we have these dark factories that are run by robots. China doesn't have a competitive advantage anymore. Vietnam or any of these countries don't have a competitive advantage on low-cost labor. And so those factories are, where are you going to put those factories? You're not going to put them in New Zealand. You're going to put them where the market is. You're going to put them right in the middle of North America where the resources are. So you'll mine the copper, you'll have the timber and the trees. We're pumping natural gas is the cheapest it's ever been. Those factories in the Midwest and in Texas and places where there's a lot of natural resources and energy, those automated factories will be, right at the wellhead of whatever the resources are, they'll churn out products and we'll send them to the East and West Coast, just where all the big markets are. Why do you need low cost labor in Vietnam?
Right. You kill all the inefficiencies too.
Yep. And you have none of the transportation costs.
Yeah. So John, one of the last questions here that I'd like to ask is, who will be the winners and losers and how?
Yeah. So the winners are going to be who they've always been. It's the creative people, the entrepreneurs, right? The Elon Musks of today, and the Thomas Edisons of the past, right?
But how about the little guy like John in Utah?
Yeah. So there's always been guys like us, though, right? Guys like you and me. That there's always the big guys you read about in history because they're there. But there's always room in that middle level for the men and women that are creative. And so my whole premise in the book is that things are going to get tough, and I think a lot of people are going to lose their jobs and be laid off. But the good part is that enabling part of technology is going to free up those of us that want to be entrepreneurs when the barriers to entry come down, when the costs to getting in to starting our own companies, our own little corporations are going to be, they've never been as low as they are now, and they're going to keep getting lower. That leaves markets for guys like you and I and all of the men and women out there that are listening to penetrate, because we can use our creative skills to things that we create in our mind, we can now create physically through robotics and artificial intelligence and all the things that we didn't have access to before. So the creative among us are going to do extremely well, extremely well.
So John, one of the questions we like to ask our guests is, what are the books that you're reading currently right now? And what are the books and media or whatever you've watched, videos, lectures, whatever, that have influenced you most to get you sort of where you're at now?
Yeah. So the latest book, actually, I'm a history buff. I'm one of those, I don't know, the farther you look back in history, the more you can see into the future. So actually the book that's on my table right now is, I think it's called Killer Angels. It's, oh,
cool.
It's about it's Civil War. It's a Civil War thing. So I'm a big history person.
Yeah.
And aside from that, though, I like to focus on raw data. And so, and again, this gets back to where data is free. In the old days, I had to read the Wall Street Journal because that's where it was at. I had to read the New York Times. And really, I still think if you read those two papers, whether digitally or whatever, if you read those two, you're pretty much covering the pretty broad spectrum.
Good to go. Yeah.
Because everything else is kind of originates from them, and Financial Times of London, a couple other things. But that's where the broad information comes from. But today, what I have access to that I didn't, 10 or 15 years ago, I can go get the data myself. And so if the New York Times is telling me unemployment's a certain number, or Wall Street's telling me, sales are up this year, whatever, I can actually go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics or to the Association of Realtors or whatever, and I can find out exactly what those real numbers are. And I can throw them into a spreadsheet, and I can make up my own, draw my own conclusions. And so I'm a big believer in data, and encourage people to go look at the source material. Don't necessarily listen to what someone else is telling you.
Excellent. So John, where can the listener and viewer get more information about you, what you're doing, what you have upcoming, etc.?
Sure. I got a couple of things going on out there, but the easiest place to find me is I have a podcast. It's called the Wealthsteading Podcast. And that's like homesteading, right?
Yeah.
It's take off of homesteading. It's wealthsteading. And so the Wealthsteading Podcast, wealthsteading.com. It's iTunes, all the normal places. You can find me through that. I got a YouTube channel, some other things that they're smaller, but the podcast is my main means of communication to people. And in that, really, it's what I talk about in that book. It's applying today's trends to building wealth, to trading stocks, everything from the information I learned from my grandfather to what stocks I traded yesterday.
Right. Well, thank you so much. And everyone out there, make sure to go buy yourself a copy of The Robots Are Coming, a human survival guide to profiting in the age of automation. You can get it at all the places where you buy books and that type of thing. We definitely recommend it. We have guests on the show that we read their books and we really like their stuff. This is a very digestible and easy for anyone to sort of get, and there's really good data in it as well, deep data if you need it to, and good worksheets and that type of thing. So everyone, thank you so much for watching. Again, I am Adolfo Fronda at Nerd Stalker on Twitter, nerdstalker.com. Hit the subscribe if you're watching this now, and watch some other videos. If you're listening, give us the old 5 stars on iTunes and the whole thing, a nice review. We'd really appreciate it. And thanks so much for your time. John, thank you for being on the show.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. See you guys next time.